Last summer, if you remember, was a long, hot and dry one, and towards the end of it we had a hosepipe ban which lasted several months. With reservoirs emptying, Jersey Water also had to run the desalination plant at Lemoy for an extended period at a cost of £8,000 a day. More recently, we've had dozens of families forced to leave their homes in Granvaux due to flooding, and subsequent calls for the water level in the reservoir there to be lowered to protect properties down the valley. Add the impact of climate change, population increases, development, historic water contamination, and the pressure on land use, and you can see that the island's water utility company has a lot on its plate. The man at the helm of Jersey Water is Helier Smith, who is tasked with setting the company's long-term strategy. He's also in charge of the utility's day-to-day operations and its response to the Granvaux flooding, to which we turn to first. Helier, let's first turn to one of the most recent issues, Granvaux. What can you and Jersey Water do to ensure that that doesn't happen again, and is lowering the level of the water, which has been suggested by some, the right way forward?
Firstly, when we think of flooding at Granvaux, our thoughts firstly turn to the residents of Granvaux and the challenges they've been through. Some of them are still going through significant upheaval caused by the flooding, and so our thoughts remain with them and their journey through this, and hopefully it'll come to an end quickly. In terms of the flooding on the day and Jersey Water's role, Jersey Water is very much plays a supporting role on the day. We have responsibility for drinking water. We have no legal responsibility for drainage in the island, and that responsibility falls to IHE. So in any flooding event, Jersey Water's role is really one of support and assistance, which is what we did on the day, pumping as much water as we possibly could away from the flood area on the day and capturing a small amount of water in the reservoir using the capacity there. I think overall we pumped approximately 450,000 cubic metres of water away in something like 24, 48 hours or something like that. So really, it sounds like a lot of water, but it was relatively small compared to the total volume. So our supporting role it was very clear on the day, and we carried that out to as much as we could. And in terms of the reservoir level, there's obviously been much thought about how we can prevent flooding in the future. And I think rather than jumping onto specific topics, we need to look at flooding in the whole. So it's a whole system that needs to be put in place to protect Granvaux and other areas in the island from flooding in the future. And that process starts from forecasting rainfall when it happens. I think the Jersey Met haven't historically done rainfall, severe weather warnings for heavy rainfall. And so the island was taken by surprise on that day. Early warning system, so the catchment, when it's saturated, people need to be made aware that that's the case, and the risk of flooding is obviously much more exacerbated when that happens. And then the whole process of capturing the water and slowing it down as it comes down the catchment through the valleys and then goes out to sea, that all needs to be slowed down to minimise the volume of flooding. And I think that's what IHE are looking at in terms of their flood response planning for Granvaux. One of those options that are being considered, I think, is the potential to lower the levels in Granvaux to theoretically capture some floodwater. And whilst at first look that seems to be an obvious thing to do, it's actually fraught with numerous problems. And Jersey Water's view is that we are looking at the option and evaluating it from a water quality and engineering perspective, but our initial view is that the reservoir shouldn't be used for flood alleviation. And there's three real reasons why. The first one is the reservoir is not very big. The Granvaux catchment is over 9 square kilometres, and so it's the biggest in the island. 10% of the island is taken up by the Granvaux catchment. So all the water falling in that area congregates down into the Granvaux Valley. The Granvaux reservoir is very small. It's 230,000 cubic metres of water, which sounds a lot, but is tiny. Queen's Valley is Jersey Water's biggest reservoir, and Granvaux is significantly smaller than Queen's Valley, and therefore doesn't hold much water. So the potential for it to capture floodwater as it comes down the valley is very limited. To capture a 1 in 100 event, the reservoir would nearly have to be empty. So effectively, it's no longer a reservoir. And to capture an event similar to the one we saw in January, which is somewhere between a 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 event, you'd be looking at the reservoir down at around 40% capacity. So effectively, really quite low. And then when you get into those realms, you start running into significant operational problems and significant risks to the water supply. So the reservoir is really small. The other factor is, this is a drinking water reservoir designed for drinking water. Grand Vaux, whilst it's a small reservoir, it has the largest yield in terms of water that the island uses. 20% or 1/5 of all the water we use in Jersey comes from the Grand Vaux catchment. So we can't do without it. So we need to protect that water resource, and we need to be able to abstract from it all the time, 24/7, year round, so that we have that water available for use. The island is already suffering water resource constraints. So we had a hosepipe ban last summer because of the dry weather. We have a standby desalination plant to be there in the event that we don't have enough water because of lack of rainfall. So sacrificing or compromising the Grand Vaux reservoir really puts that water resource at risk, and we simply can't do that without replacing it in some other form. And then the third big reason is water quality. Holding the reservoir down at, say, 40 or 50% significantly increases the risk that the reservoir could be polluted by nitrates, pesticides, and so forth during normal operation. And it's much less resilient if the water levels are low because it can't dilute out those pollutants. So we have one risk of the reservoir becoming contaminated during normal use. If there's a flooding event, effectively what you're saying is that we would allow floodwater, which contains an enormous amount of raw untreated sewage, from entering the reservoir, which in itself would effectively pollute the reservoir and take it out of service for as long as that pollution was present. And you could be looking at weeks of not being able to use Grand Vaux reservoir because it's full of sewage. And when 20% of the water we use in the island comes from Grand Vaux, that's simply unacceptable to be consciously deciding to do that.
And is it fair to say that when the properties were being flooded, the reservoir actually wasn't full at that time?
It was nearly full. So we've obviously had a very wet January month, and the strategy that Jersey Water has is to capture as much water as we can during the winter, so that we've got the water resources to get through the dry months, so the spring, the summer, and the early autumn. And so our philosophy has always been to be as full as we can by Christmas, trying to stay full throughout the winter, protecting our reservoirs against the pollution arising from potato growing. Effectively ring fencing those reservoirs and using the water, protecting the water. So yes, the reservoir was pretty much full. We had, I think, 15 million litres of capacity in the reservoir on the day, which we took in some water to help offset the flooding. But the way we run that reservoir was absolutely by the book on the day.
You've raised an interesting point where last year, as every islander will know, we had a drought, we had a hosepipe ban in place, we had the desalination plant up and running. And at the time, I remember you saying that, and you've just reiterated the point, the winter period will be key to establishing whether we might face a similar problem in the summer of 23. Where are we at with our water supplies at the moment? Are we looking quite healthy, albeit we don't know what the weather will be this summer?
Yeah, we can't foretell the weather, but it's been an unusual winter. We've had a really wet November and a really wet January, obviously exacerbated by the heavy rainfall on the 17th. So by the end of January, we were pretty full, which was a good place to be from a water resources perspective. But in February, we've had 15% of the average rainfall for the month, which is next to nothing. So during February, we saw reservoir levels starting to drop, which is pretty unusual for this time of year. We'd normally see reservoirs being full throughout to the end of March. But seeing reservoirs drop in February is kind of a bit of alarm call. They've recovered since in March, but we're still only 95% full. One only has to look across to France and mainland Europe. They've had one of the driest winters on record. Snowfall hasn't been there, so we're looking at rivers like the Loire and other big rivers across Europe being very, very dry and so low that they're worried about this summer coming. And that's off the back of the driest winter in 500 years, driest summer in 500 years. in mainland Europe. So we can never take water resources for granted, and especially in an island where we've only got 120 days of storage. And, we've obviously got a desalination plant, but it's a backup device.
Is it increasingly unpredictable? And I know you're not a climate change scientist, but are you seeing evidence that the established patterns, are not what they were?
I think I've worked at Jersey Water for 20 years, and I don't think any summer has been normal. And every summer or winter has been punctuated by some form of extreme weather, whether it's extreme dry, extreme cold, extreme heat. And this last few years, we seem to see them all concentrating in very short periods of time. We've seen extremely wet weather, extremely dry weather, the hottest temperatures. And I think, the science is saying that these things are going to happen more and more frequently and more extremely in the future. And so as an island, we need to prepare for that, both in terms of water resources, which are obviously essential for life, but also in flood mitigation. As an island, we need to be ready for floods when they happen, not just in Grand Vaux, but there's plenty of other areas where there's risk of flooding. And
do you see Jersey Water having a role in that flood prevention on an island level?
Well, I think, we obviously want to be a great corporate citizen. Our assets are located where there is water because of the nature of our business. And we'd like to do whatever we can in terms of flood prevention. But, I again, caution against using really important water resource assets, which we depend on throughout the year, as a tactical device to provide short-term benefit against flooding.
Helen, in 2021, Jersey Water published its long-term water resources and drought management plan, which presented several options to cope with a rising population, increasing water use. These included raising the dam at Val de la Mar, I believe even building a new dam further down the valley at Val de la Mar, beefing up the desalination plant, and possibly even flooding a new valley. Are they still on the table? Are these still possibilities?
Yeah, so in 21, the resource plan that we published showed that we had a water resources deficit to fill by 2045. 8 million litres a day is forecast. That's in drought conditions. And we've been busy since then doing all of the measures that we promised in our plan, and a few of those on the demand side. So leakage, we've been actively managing our leakage, and we're very proud that we've got one of the lowest levels of leakage in the UK. But that's not enough for us. We want to be one of the best in the world. So we're investing heavily in smart technology to help us identify leakage as and when it happens so that we can address it quickly. We're also investing in smart metering technology for our customers so that we can alert them when they've got leakage or when their consumption is out of the normal range for them, and help them reduce their consumption. So those are all pieces of investment that we're making at the moment. And I'd like to see us do more around water efficiency as well. We've already got one of the lowest levels of per capita consumption in the island across the UK. But I think, again, we need to be up there with leaders of the pack. So we're very good. It's 115 litres per person per day as an average at the moment. I'd like to see us getting down to 100 over the next decade or so. In terms of resources, the water resource plan focused principally around desalination, extending the plant that we've got at the moment, and we're actively underway with that programme of work. We've completed all of the feasibility studies necessary to inform the design for the next upgrade, which we're planning to start building subject to planning permission over the next couple of years. So by 25, 26, that should be completed and in place. And so all of that, and then we're also looking at the PFAS challenge and seeing how we can extract more water from Pont Marquet and the boreholes in St Wands, but that's very much slower burn in terms of the work we're doing with government.
We'll come on to that. I was just wondering whether there is more that you'd like to see holistically, perhaps from, for instance, a planning perspective, where new homes, for instance, are required, or there's more incentive to store rainwater or more brown water recycling. Is there more that we can do, outside of just Jersey Water's remit?
Yeah, certainly. I think as water becomes more and more scarce, we need to become smarter with it, and designing water efficient homes from the outset is obviously much easier than retrofitting it. So I know the Environment Minister is very keen on moving that agenda forward, so building water efficiency into the housing regulations so that they're designed from the start. It does add cost to new homes, but it's also environmental benefit, so really quite a significant opportunity.
One thing that you've mentioned in the past is perhaps turning effluent from Balazan into drinking water. And I understand the Environment Minister, Jonathan Reneth, who you've just mentioned, is also very keen on exploring this option. Getting over the kind of icky feeling of perhaps drinking one's own effluent, do you think it's still a goer?
Yeah, I do. I think there's an icky initial reaction, but the reality is it happens all over the world. Singapore, it's called New Water. They recycle their wastewater, and it's drunk and it's to a high standard. And it happens in Australia, and it happens in the UK, albeit via a river. So it's very much a commonplace occurrence, and it seems crazy that we're pumping millions of litres of water out to sea in Jersey when we're crying out for it when it's not raining. But I think, our next water resources plan is we're just getting underway with it. It's a 5-yearly process, and so this is the next phase we're looking at, and we'll be publishing in around 2025. The methodology is getting more and more cautious, so we're going to see a greater and greater need for more resource in the future. And so we need to be really looking very closely at effluent reuse, more desalination potentially. It may be more viable. Additional reservoir storage, albeit that comes with huge planning and environmental challenges. So all of those big ticket items are still very much on the table, and we need to be looking at them now and planning for the future.
You're a utility. By nature, you're quite capital intensive. How will you pay for this? And will we have to pay more for our water in the future?
I think, what I'd say is everything that Jersey Water does is paid for by our customers. There isn't a magic pot of money from which we can get investment. And so the great objective is to deliver great value for our customers, and if that means needing to invest in a new desalination plant or a new reservoir, then taking our customers on that journey so they can understand the investment required and they agree that that's the best course of action. I think that that's the answer, rather than just simply arbitrarily imposing stuff on them. So I think we're going to look at, over the next course of the water resources plan, is bringing our customers on that journey through a consultation process and really having those abilities to have a conversation with our customer, either through a smaller, representative group or more generally around the options for the island and how we take them forward.
And in the short term, we've mentioned a lot about the cost of living crisis we're going through. Is that something that has had a bearing on Jersey Water? Have you seen your own costs rise, which may lead to unwelcome price rises on people's bills?
Yeah, certainly we've had significant increases across many of our costs. We're obviously a large user of chemicals, and we've seen, I think one of our chemicals has gone up by 150% in less than a year. Everything we buy seems to have got more and more expensive, especially things like pipes and fittings, and anything where raw material consumption is considerable. The price rise has been enormous. But likewise, in trying to recruit people is becoming more expensive, and our contracting services that we procure in are again more expensive. So across the board, we've seen significant increase in our cost base. But we were very conscious that we wanted to protect our customers from that to the extent possible. So last year, 1st of January, our price increase was 6%, which was 1.9% below RPI. So we're really trying to shield as much as we can our customers from that impact, as we have done over the last 20 years, trying to keep our price increases as low as we possibly can. That being said, we're still seeing pressure on our costs, still seeing prices of raw materials increasing, and we still need to invest in our infrastructure going forward. So I can't predict what our tariff increase next year is going to be, other than it won't be before the 1st of January 2024, which I've promised already. But there will be a price increase, I'm sure, but we'll do our utmost to keep it as low as possible, but balancing the need to be able to invest in the future.
Just returning to some of the long-term issues and some of the strategies, looking at the draft management plan also, and you've mentioned this already, one of the things you have to deal with is the PFAS pollution, particularly in St Juan's Bay. And you've previously mentioned trialling technology which could remove the chemical from water supplies. How is that going?
Yeah, so the PFAS work is ongoing with government. We're part of the technical officer group, and that project is really being led by government because it's a pollution incident, and we're actively supporting it and contributing to it. In the meantime, the water we supply through the mains network is fully compliant with all PFAS regulations for drinking water. World Health Organization have published in 2022 guidelines for drinking water regulations, and we fully comply with that. So our customers should have no concern around the compliance of our water with the best practice standards that are out there. for water quality. In terms of the future and the ability to abstract more water, we've got significant PFAS concerns in Portmarquet catchment, which is the railway walk, effectively, water we capture from there, and in the boreholes in St Wands. And we're looking to see how we can take more water out of there in the future, but obviously without the PFAS contained therein. We trialled technology in a it's a desktop exercise basically. So there's equipment the size of a suitcase which you put the water through and see if it works. So it's not necessarily representative of industrial supply quantities, but it was found to be highly effective. It removed, I think, 99% of the PFAS or thereabouts, and so demonstrated it could work. The challenge is the scale that we would need to operate at and the cost. These plants are extremely expensive, eye-wateringly so. I won't tell you the number off the top of my head, but I don't want to get it wrong. But it really makes you think twice about whether it's actually affordable. So what we need to do is look at all of the available treatment solutions and see if we can come up with one which is much more affordable for the island through more conventional treatment technologies.
And just looking at other projects, you've mentioned that you'll review it, or you've got the next drought plan coming for the next 5 years. What are we likely to see first? Presumably we're not going to see a valley flooded in the near future, but are we potentially looking at more desalination? Are we looking at more capacity in other areas?
Yeah, so within the next 5 years, I would, subject to planning and all the relevant consents, foresee that we're going to have another 5 or 6 million litre capacity on the desalination plant, and that would take it from 10 million litres a day, which is half of our demand, to 15 or 16 million litres a day, which is 3/4 of our daily demand. And we're actively working on that. We have to go through the consent process, but I'd like to see that delivered in that time frame. The longer term stuff around effluent reuse and additional valleys, it's much longer term. Queen's Valley took 20 years from design to delivery, and I suspect flooding another valley would probably take that or longer. So these decisions take a long time, and there's obviously a lot of hurdles to get through. So that longer term thing's a bit more of a slow burn, but we need to start now because of the lead time in delivering them. We'll need it when by the time we can deliver it.
In parallel, the government has said recently that it's in the early stages of writing a water strategy for the whole island, which could take 2 to 3 years to complete. Presumably Jersey Water are very much feeding into that government strategy.
Yeah, we're very much part and parcel of that process, and we've fully endorsed the government's decision to develop a water strategy, something that's been completely absent historically. So the government taking an interest in the essential resource for all of our lives and well-being is absolutely great, and we fully welcome it. The scope of that strategy at the moment is wider than just Jersey Water's remit, so it's still in draft, but as far as I understand it, it's from sky to sea. So we do the drinking water piece, then IHE do the drainage piece, and there's various private supplies and so forth. And all of that is part of the whole ecosystem of water in the island, and that's part of the water strategy. And we're a small bit of it, but a really important bit, because that will drive the plans for additional resources and so forth.
So presumably you would welcome a more holistic look at water in general and its use and supply in Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to safeguard water supplies because they're critical to the future, and with growing population and climate change, it's going to become more and more difficult to meet the demand for the island, and having a comprehensive holistic water strategy to make that easier should be a good thing.
We've talked about some of the big capital projects and government decisions. I'd just like to finish on islanders themselves as individuals, us. What can we do as residents of the island to support Jersey Water in its aims and ensure that we don't run out with water at key times?
I think that the easiest thing is to become water efficient and not waste water. It's really easy to save water when you're conscious of it going down the drain, and every time it goes down the drain, it's a bit of a lost opportunity to use that water somewhere else. In the summer months, we're getting into summer bedding season, where all the garden centres get inundated with people planting their summer flowers, and that all gets watered, and we see a significant increase in the demand for water over the spring. But recycling water in the home from washing dishes and all of that sort of stuff can make a big difference in reducing demand, but you still have a nice garden. We've got a Get Water Fit app on our website, which will give you a tailored water efficiency plan for your home. You answer some very simple questions about your water use, and the app will tell you where you can save the most water. And not only does it save water, but it reduces your water bill, and it can also reduce your power bill as well, because you're not heating as much water. So it's a triple whammy benefit for a single activity. So for customers who want to save some money and do the right thing for water resources in the island, it's a really good opportunity, and it's straight on our website, Get Water Fit.
That was Helier Smith, CEO at Jersey Water, and our thanks go to him for this interview. You can find this and other Bailiwick podcasts in all the usual pod places. Tune in next week for more.